U.S. Department of State disclosed 2018 report on terror on November 1st and criticized Pakistan for the following issues: non-prevention of terrorism financing, not detecting, and non-prosecution of terrorists. Further, Pakistan was criticized for not following international standards on such matters. And the same report claimed that Pakistan failed in the fight against organizations providing training, recruiting staff, and collecting money within its national borders. The country's banking system was also criticized for the option of sending unlicensed money, facilitating the collection and sending money by and to terrorists. Pakistan's criticizing response to the report on terror was Pakistan disappointed by the allegation in regard to combating terrorism as expressed by the U.S. Department of State. What would you like to say in this regard? You already explained, you gave some information, but I want to ask anyway, how is Pakistan proceeding in the fight against terrorism, ISIS, and the Taliban in the region?
Pakistan has been fighting global terrorist network. Now, this is something that was kind of, like this global terrorist network came into being not because of our fault. It was an offshoot of what happened in Afghanistan years ago, starting 1979, when the Russians invaded Afghanistan, and of course the resistance started, and we supported that resistance. And after that, like when the Russians left Afghanistan, there was a void, there was a civil war. We were asking everybody, our friends in the West, that, let's try to stabilize the situation in Afghanistan. Don't leave Afghanistan, but they left, and there's something that they regretted subsequently, as has been mentioned by many of their leaders, like Hillary Clinton, for instance, and many others, that yes, they made a mistake in leaving Afghanistan just like that. That is where the terror emerged from that vacuum that was left. Terror groups like Al-Qaeda and others, they took root in Afghanistan, and they became a problem for us as well, because Pakistan has a 1,600 kilometer border or even more with Afghanistan. And it's a very porous border because, you see, in Afghanistan, half of the population in Afghanistan is Pashtuns. We also have a big Pashtun population in Pakistan, in our northwest. And in fact, we have more Pashtuns than Afghanistan. So the thing is, it was very difficult for us because, then the spillover effect was happening in Pakistan. And as I explained, it was at a great cost and at a sort of, great sacrifice that we were able to eliminate those terrorist networks. So with our American friends and others, we were always, because, okay, they were saying, well, you're doing a lot, but you have to do more. And we used to tell them, look, we have done more, and more than enough. Now it's your part that needs to be played, because it's your side of the border, in the sense that, because you see, NATO troops were there in Afghanistan, they have been there, or ISAF. American troops are still there. So we said it's now your side of the bargain which needs to be fulfilled. So these kind of, because when they failed to defeat the Taliban in Afghanistan, right? So this is what the Afghanistan government representatives used to do. They used to point fingers at Pakistan, because it's always very easy to make somebody else a scapegoat, and that has been happening for a long time. You mentioned 2008, 2009. Yes, we had this debate with with our American friends and others at that time as well. It was all about, who will do how much, but since then, things have gotten much, much better, This is 2019 now, end of 2019, and we have covered a lot of ground, like I mentioned. We have undertaken a lot of steps. These are very challenging steps, It's not easy to fight terror. We are a developing country. We don't really have those mechanisms of of the developed world to control, all these elements in terms of like banking channels and all because there's a big parallel economy in Pakistan. People don't really always use banking channels. There's a lot of cash transactions. There's a like It happens in every country of the world, but in developing countries, the percentage is higher. Because of that, it becomes even more difficult to just to kind of seal all the avenues. But I can tell you something. Even now in the world, money laundering, has it stopped in the world? Not even in the developed world it has stopped. In fact, trillions of dollars of money looted from the developing countries is still being invested in the developed world. All these offshore banks, the safe havens, these are all channels for the terrorists. Use these channels as well, unfortunately. So the point is, we have to do it together. We can't do it alone. We can't do it alone. The Americans can't do it alone. The Europeans can't do it alone. We all have to work together for that. And we are doing that, We have done our part more than others. But unfortunately, as I say, success has many fathers. Failure has none. So when, there were some failures in Afghanistan, then they had to find the scapegoats. And the scapegoat, unfortunately, is always Pakistan, because we are the next door neighbor. We have sort of, such a big border with Afghanistan. We have and we have to remember, we are still housing millions of Afghan refugees in Pakistan. We not only supported peace and development in Afghanistan through our contribution against terrorism, and we have spent hundreds of millions, in fact more than $1 billion in Afghanistan in promoting development. But also we kept millions of refugees from Afghanistan over the years. At one point it was 5 million refugees. Even now,
that's one of the reasons.
And that's a problem for us as well, because some of those refugees then are involved in activities which can be called sometimes subversive activities, and this this type of issues like this financing of these type of activities that you've mentioned. So on the one hand, when we say, okay, let's send these terrorists as these refugees back, and because they sometimes can be a source of some of these activities, then we are requested, oh no, please don't, because Afghanistan cannot absorb them right away. Please keep them with you for some more time. So it's a catch-22 situation. On the one hand, we have to keep all those refugees. On the one hand, we have to fight all these terrorist networks which are which are based in Afghanistan, and they are attacking. They're trying to launch terrorist attacks in Pakistan. And on the other hand, we get these accusations of of the terrorist financing, of not clamping down on terrorist financing to that extent and everything. But I think in the last few years, the situation has gotten much better in terms of removing these misperceptions, these misunderstandings. Pakistan and the US, we are now cooperating, we are collaborating, we have a much better understanding in these issues, and we are trying to support the peace process in Afghanistan. So we very much hope that once this peace process succeeds and there's peace in Afghanistan, then together we would be able to root out any vestiges of these evils which would be still remaining.
Despite the political turmoil experienced in recent years, Pakistan became the most popular or favorite investment region of some countries like China, Saudi Arabia, or Iran. May we say that this is interlinked with the One Belt, One Road project? And when we look at these investments, is it possible to say that Pakistan acts as a bridge between various countries?
Definitely. Pakistan is located on the confluence of 3 regions, actually: South Asia, Central Asia, and Middle East or West Asia. That gives Pakistan that that natural space for promoting connectivity. Unfortunately, because of these problems that we have faced, which in turn was based on the problems in Afghanistan, the spillover of that, we could not translate that strategic location into into trade and development through connectivity. But in the last few years, first of all, we have to remember that what has happened in the last few years. In the last some years, we have been able to defeat terrorism. And the occurrence of, or the incidence of terrorist incidents in Pakistan has reduced to the extent where Pakistan, okay, you can still have occasional terrorist attack, but that type of threat is being faced by almost every country now. Like in Europe, look, here in Berlin, 2 years back, there was a terrorist attack. Paris had terrorist attacks, London had terrorist attacks, Brussels had terrorist attacks, in so many places in Europe, in America they had. So the thing is, no country is immune to terrorism, like we all have to live with that now, we have to fight it and try to finish it, but we still have to, while it's not totally eliminated, we have to live with this threat. Pakistan is living with a bit of that threat as well. But it's now at the same level in terms of other countries, It doesn't have any more threat than than most countries. And that has come about because of all that a very concerted action we have undertaken through our National Action Plan against terrorism. Now, as that terrorism went down, and as business activity improved in Pakistan, many countries realized that Pakistan is an excellent location for investment. China in particular, because they had this vision of Brick and Road Initiative, BRI, whereby what they want to do is they want to rejuvenate those old Silk Roads in a much bigger way. They want to join Europe and Asia, this region, integrate this region through improving infrastructure, rails and road networks, and all those kind of communication highways, and industrial setting up industries along the way as well. For what? To promote more trade, to promote more cooperation, economic cooperation between countries, which is a good thing, because you see, more trade, more economic cooperation brings what? It brings more peace, more development, more prosperity. And Pakistan, we agreed to be a part of that. So together we've started this project called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It's like the southern wing of BRIC, Belt and Road Initiative. And the current projects that we are having, the current phases, that is worth about $60 billion. Projects that have been completed, the projects which are still underway, the projects which are being envisioned. There are 3 phases until 2030. Of this. Now, a big part of that is what? Investment in energy, because Pakistan was facing a deficiency of energy. So, in fact, more than 10,000 megawatts or 12,000 megawatts production capacity has been added in the last few years as part of this China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. But there are many other projects which are basically about improving motorways, setting up new motorways, or improving the railway lanes, building a new port as well, this port of Gawada. And we have to remember, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is what? It's about joining Western China, through Pakistan, with the this very important sea passage called the Strait of Hormuz, or the Persian Gulf. So basically, where we are setting up this, we are establishing this new port of Gawada, which actually is naturally the biggest deep sea port in the region.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of its natural layout, and eventually it will become that. That is what we envision. And imagine the connectivity that would promote then. All this trade coming from China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, which is a landlocked country, then moving on to Arabian Sea, where you are connected with all these rich countries, the GCC countries, Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Bahrain and UAE, and Iran is there on the other side as well. So it's this is a very important project. The whole emphasis is on trade and development and promoting connectivity, because Pakistan will then become a hub for the region, not just for trade, but also for energy, and business and industry. So it's In fact, just a few days back, there was this big seminar which took place on Brick and Road Initiative, and I was a keynote speaker there. And I presented our perspective of BRI. I know there's some skepticism of Brick and Road Initiative in the West, including in Germany. But in our view, that is based on just some misperceptions or misunderstandings. This is a benign project. This project only envisions promoting trade and promoting economic cooperation between countries.
In such a difficult geography, and despite the war in Afghanistan and the problems with India for years, the turmoil and instability within the country, the new prime minister wants to give new dynamism. On the other hand, Imran Khan seen as to govern in a way that's more modest and closer to the public than the usual. Can you talk about the democratization process in Pakistan with the new prime minister? How is this new process developing in terms of human rights, the status of religious minorities, and censorship of media?
First of all, as I mentioned before, these were the third elections, national elections, which took place, after the last military intervention, which had happened, I've said, way back in 1999. So these are the third elections, which means that democracy is being strengthened in Pakistan ever since there was the transition back to democracy. And this time around, a new party has come to power on a national level. PTI, headed by Prime Minister Imran Khan. Now, this party had this manifesto of Naya Pakistan, or a new Pakistan. Now, what does that represent? That represents a Pakistan which is totally focused on development, a Pakistan which would have more social justice, more equitable development, a Pakistan which would be a proud member of the Committee of Nations. Now, for that, we have to surmount some challenges, Well, what are those challenges? Firstly, of course, we were facing terrorism. We have defeated it for most part, but there's still some vestiges left, So we have to eliminate that as well. We're doing that through a national action program, which is a very holistic program. Secondly, to restore economic stability. We were facing a financial crisis about a year back. Many countries face financial crises every now and then. It's a common thing in a country's economic transition, or sometimes even if there's not a transition, economic history. The government has been able to meet that challenge of this. This was a kind of a big financial crisis, and because of that, it was started as a balance of payment crisis. Then we had a currency, major currency devaluation. So in some ways, it was a currency crisis as well then. But after that, this government has the reforms that they've brought about. They have really worked. In fact, that we have overcome that financial crisis. We are in a phase of stability, and we'll move in the next phase of growth. In terms of stability, for example, after 4 years, this month we had a current account surplus, and coming after such a huge crisis just a year back, that's a big achievement. While you're doing that, while you're overcoming an economic or a financial crisis, there's some economic pain. This is natural. Any student of economics would know that. But the government has a very clear agenda. The agenda is that they are going to create millions of jobs. They are going to help build millions of homes. Because you see, Pakistan is a very young country. The median age in Pakistan is just 22 and 20, or 23, compared to median age of 44, 5 in Germany. But that is sort of, that is an amazing asset. You have all that very young population. But again, it's a challenge as well, because, you have to educate all these young people. You have to, provide adequate health care. And then you have to provide jobs, like you have to create the conditions where jobs are there for all these people, or for these youngsters. Pakistan is moving in the right direction. We are moving in a direction where there'll be long-term economic stability, long-term economic growth and prosperity. In terms of social justice as well, this government is really endeavoring hard. They've brought about a wide-ranging reform agenda. It's a work in progress, but it's happening, and people are very excited about that. In the last elections, this government got its main support from the young, from the educated, from the dynamic segments of Pakistan's population who wanted to see a change, and that change is now happening in Pakistan. Imran Khan himself, of course, he's a international celebrity. People know him, even before he was in politics. He has this vision of a very progressive, modern Muslim country, a country where people would live as per the ideals of Islam and as per their as per their aspirations for growth. A country where there's social justice, a country where there's equitable economic opportunities, a country which is proud of its heritage and culture, and a country which is respected in the world for its role abroad in terms of contributing in international peace and development. Now this is, it's not a, it's not a small challenge, This requires a great deal of work. And I think that this government is up to that, and they've made a great start.
What about censorship of media?
This is, it's very interesting because I see Pakistani TV channels every day. I look at Pakistani newspapers every day. And seriously, this makes me laugh. Because, if I could show you those programs, they're criticizing the government, they're criticizing, like the Prime Minister and others, like to the extent that I don't see in the West. I don't see that in Germany, by the way, I mean, I see that not just because there's more than 60 news TV channels, Most popular channels in Pakistan are news channels. People love to watch news channels in Pakistan. In Pakistan, political talk shows are watched more than the soap operas, for example, And TV anchors are very kind of, they're like household names in Pakistan. Pakistani newspapers as well, when I read them, I don't see any sign of any censorship. I'm just surprised by this misperception, because Pakistani newspapers, and I read some Indian newspapers as well, I want to sort of, I have a perspective of the region. I can tell you that I don't really see that freedom there. I don't really, and Modi government is gradually, they are sort of, there's a lot of complaints as well, how there are many, many ways of influencing media and sort of, and there's a shrinking space in India. But I don't see that happening in Pakistan. I actually see Pakistani media more free, more vibrant, and sometimes I think probably too excited, the type of things that you read there, you wouldn't find in the Western media in terms of, so, if there was any censorship or if there was any sort of lack of space there, how would you find all these sort of, like news channels and all these talk shows and all these news articles and all these news reports, criticizing the government openly, talking about any issue under the sun, and sort of, in total disregard of whatever is the government's perspective or somebody else's perspective. They just, give their own perspective. So what else is media freedom? Like I'm seriously at a loss to understand, like where these complaints are coming from.
Okay. So, what is the current status of women's rights and gender equality in Pakistan? The country has elected a woman, Benazir Bhutto, in 1988, for years before of European countries.
That's true.
And where exactly is the woman's place in business and social life in Pakistan?
Not to mention that America still doesn't have their first woman president. Like they came close to it, but they still haven't got one. In Pakistan, Pakistani women. I mean, you just met my wife as well. I mean, they're very suave. They're very sort of, like, I would say that they, in some ways they're kind of, like, they're more dynamic than the men, I believe. And they're very open in expressing themselves and expressing their views and sort of, like, and I see them participating in national affairs more and more in every segment. For example, I can, just give you, just a few instances. In Pakistani universities and colleges today, if you go to some of the best ones in Pakistan, the number of women students or girl students is actually more than male students, First of all, that. Now that is translating into, you go to medical colleges, for example, there are more women studying there to be doctors than men. You go to professional colleges, the same, like other professional colleges or sort of liberal arts colleges or whatever. Now this is translating into a big transformation in the job market as well. Like I've learned very pleasantly, just yesterday I asked somebody that, every year we get a certain number of new officers in the foreign service, and they come through a very challenging competitive examination. And I asked someone, okay, in the last batch, how many people are there? And they said, okay, about 16 or 20. And I said, what's the gender ratio? They said exactly 50-50. And that is, now this is the case with foreign service. Now in foreign service, traditionally, you have much less women than men, even in the US foreign service or the German foreign service or the Turkish foreign service. But in Pakistan now we're coming to, like to almost a parity now. Same is the case with many other professions. There is an equal opportunity situation now in Pakistan. So now, I think there can't be any complaint. And in Pakistan, by the way, you don't, because in America and many other Western countries, there's this complaint that women are paid less for doing the same job, in the workplace. In Pakistan, that is not the case. In Pakistan, the salary would be the same, regardless of the gender. Okay, still, I mean, having said that, okay, we still have some challenges, like, okay, Pakistan is still a developing country, the places in Pakistan which are less developed than other places. There are challenges there, we need to put more girl children in the school there. But even in our countryside, even in the villages, it's very interesting. There's a culture whereby the women, they used to work in the fields with their men, So it's not like, people sometimes associate Pakistan with ultra-conservatism and sort of, they think the women are clad in burqas there and sort of, but you go to Pakistan, okay, you have the women who choose to wear burqa, of course they can wear that and they can wear that everywhere. But, like there's no restriction. You would find women donning all these beautiful Pakistani dresses, which, which are now being well recognized all over the world. The fashion industry in Pakistan is more vibrant than in many Western countries even, The art and culture is, it's all very dynamic, like on the media as well. You see all those female anchors and sort of, so I see basically a country which is actually in some ways leapfrogging, in terms of gender balance and in terms of women's rights,